The next conference committee report is Senate File 498. Senator Latz.
Madam President, I move that the foregoing recommendations and conference committee report on Senate File 498 be now adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the conference committee.
Discussion of the motion, Senator Latz.
Madam President, this is the body camera bill. We have completed our conference committee and have made some changes, which I will describe to you. The most significant change in the operational portion of the bill has to do with under what circumstances the recordings from the body camera will become automatically default public designation. The original Senate bill provided that all recordings in a private home would remain default private unless, of course, the subject were to decide to make it public, or the person who was recorded would make it public. And that recordings in the public sphere, out in the public areas, would become automatically public if there was substantial bodily harm or use of force or a deadly weapon. The bill that we have before us today eliminates the distinction between public and private places and simply says that if there is a discharge of a firearm in a circumstance involving other persons, so not relating to animals, for example, or if there is a use of force that results in substantial bodily harm or death, then that recording will become public, whether the incident occurs inside a person's home or outside in a public area. That was essentially the House position, but with the additional limitations in there relating to the firearm discharge, which had a Senate language component. I'll identify some of the other areas of significance in which we took either specifically House or Senate language. We amended the definitions of arrest data, which was a House provision to identify a portable recording system as arrest data. We also added a definition to response or incident data to include the use of portable recording systems or body cameras. Under criminal investigative data, we added some clarity as to images and recordings so that it was clear that those data was also included in criminal investigative data. Those were all House positions. We had identical positions regarding public benefit data. We split the definitions out as a blending of the House and Senate positions, so there's a separate definition for portable recording system and portable recording system data. I already noted the provisions relating to when the data becomes public. This is an expansion of public access to the recordings made by body cameras. We added a clarification from the House that a Tennyson warning is not required when this recordings are made. We added a provision that involved Senate language regarding the district court judicial bypass opportunity for persons who want to have private data made public that would otherwise be classified as private. They can go to court to ask a judge to do that under certain circumstances. And we also added language at the suggestion of Neighborhoods Organizing for Change to provide when data is redacted or held private because it might offend common sensibilities, that they can challenge that determination and ask a court to review that and overrule that if it concludes that it's appropriate to make that data public, and then provide some details on the process for that judicial review. We took the Senate language on retention of data, which provides that data must be maintained for at least 90 days if it's not active or inactive criminal investigative data, sort of the non-controversial recordings that don't rise to the level of substantial bodily harm or discharge of firearms. They have to be maintained for at least 90 days and then destroyed in accordance with the agency's records retention schedule, which is pursuant to a separate statutory section, 138.17. And then data which would ordinarily be made public, that data that involves substantial bodily harm or discharge of a firearm, must be maintained for at least 1 year, and then it may be destroyed in accordance with the agency's record retention schedule that was approved per that other statute. This language makes it easier to address issues relating to statutes of limitation for potential claims against an agency that is holding the data. And there is language that provides for the agency to hold the data longer periods of time should they feel that that is appropriate to protect themselves, or if the subject of the data requests that the data be maintained for a longer period of time as well. The access by data subjects to the data was both House and Senate language. It was combined or blended so that it was grammatically more clear, but it does provide that the subject of the data gets to look at the data at all times. A peace officer gets to look at the data as well, who is considered to be a subject of the data. And then the data can be made public if they get authority to redact either consent from other parties on the video or if those parties are redacted. There was a very controversial provision, as it turned out. We found out this morning that about the most significant controversy relating to a provision that would authorize a peace officer, that would require that a peace officer be given the opportunity to review the recorded data before writing the police report or giving a formal statement in connection with the incident. We learned this morning, or this afternoon I should say, that the governor found that provision very objectionable, to the point that were it to remain in the bill, the governor was going to veto the bill. So after continued discussions and work this afternoon, we reconvened the conference committee and agreed to remove that provision. I want to emphasize that the removal of that provision is not intended to send a message one way or the other to local agencies as to what policy they ought to adopt. They are free to adopt whatever policy they wish in connection with officer viewing of videos prior to writing reports or giving formal statements. The removal of this provision was a practical matter so that we could assure that the bill would be signed. And I have received in writing the governor's commitment that with the removal of this provision, the governor will sign the bill if the legislature goes ahead and passes this revised conference committee report. So that provision has been removed and is not in the conference committee report on your desks. We have additional language relating to the inventory of portable recording system technology. Both the Senate and the House had language to this effect, and what's in your bill covers that. There is some additional language relating to the use of agency-issued portable recording systems that prohibits a peace officer from using his or her own privately owned body camera. That language came from the House. We have language relating to the authorization of access to the data. Most of this language was House language, but they had some additional criteria with regard to access that had been adopted from the license plate reader statute, but which did not fit very well when applied to incident particular data in a body camera recording. So a couple of the paragraphs from the House language was deleted so that it would work for the body camera data. We also, but that would require that the agency establish written procedures guiding guiding the law enforcement officers' access to that data. There is language from the House relating to information sharing among law enforcement agencies as well. Basically they will have to meet the regular criteria for accessing those standards and may share it or disseminate it to another law enforcement agency, and it retains its data classification when that happens. Both bodies had language relating to required audits of the compliance with the data classification and the data practices laws in Minnesota. The Senate had required a triennial audit every 3 years. The House had required a biennial audit. We adopted the House's language with regard to the frequency of the audit, and also have language in there relating to the governing body with jurisdiction over the budget of the law enforcement agency being required to receive the audit information so that they can provide some oversight for the use, proper use of that data. And ultimately, they would have the authority, were there to be substantial noncompliance with the data practices requirements for these body camera recordings, they would have authority to suspend the use of the body cameras by the law enforcement agency until they were satisfied that procedures and practices were in place to return to compliance with the data practices laws. We accepted House language relating to summary data or summary reports of those audits that should be reported to the Legislative Commission on Data Practices and Personal Data Privacy. We changed the number of days in that language to no more than 60 days after the completion of the audit, because there was concern that 30 days would have been too soon to accomplish that task. The bill includes the Senate language requiring that the BCA be notified within 10 days anytime a law enforcement agency obtains new surveillance technology that expands the type or scope of surveillance capability of a portable recording system device beyond the video or audio recording, so that the state agencies will know when new technology is being utilized, and the public will have an opportunity to weigh in on that. And that information also must be published on the BCA's website. That was Senate language. We also adopted substantial Senate language relating to the vendor of the body camera equipment, assuring that the vendors must also comply with all of the Minnesota Data Practices Act provisions relating to the data, and must also comply with the security requirements of the FBI Criminal Justice Information Services Division. That includes and especially refers to data which is stored in the cloud. And there are substantial penalties for violations of that. Those penalties for violations of by the vendor are twice the minimum, at least twice the minimum, and up to twice the maximum allowed for exemplary damages when there's a willful violation than is currently the penalty under the Standard Data Practices Act violations. We took the House and the Senate had similar effective dates in that provision. And then we had some blended language relating to requiring a written policy by the local agency that is adopting the body camera technology, providing for the law enforcement agency to provide for an opportunity for public comment before it purchases or implements a portable recording system. The governing body must accept the public comments, provide an opportunity at a regular scheduled meeting, the body that has jurisdiction over the budget. And this in particular language was revised to accommodate the needs of sheriff's offices, which are their own governing body as elected officials. But the public comment then would then be conducted through the county, which controls the budget for the sheriff's offices. So there's an independent agency that will make sure there's adequate public process in the adoption of the use of these devices. And then we have additional language relating to the written policies and procedures for the use of the recording data. It does not require a vote by the governing body, which was originally in Senate language, and it does not mention any requirement for addressing questions of consent for the recording to take place when a person is either in or out of their home. The consent question simply is not addressed in this. These are minimum written policy requirements which are adopted out of standardized national manuals. It will be left up to the discretion of the local jurisdiction whether they wish to have a policy regarding to consent to the recording itself. And then finally, members, there is a House provision which requires that the Office of the Legislative Auditor conduct a review of the compliance with the requirements of these statutes beginning no earlier than January 1, 2019, to be completed by January 15, 2020, with a comprehensive report to the legislature. So we will have legislative auditor will have a report to the legislature to assure that the biennial audits and the other use of body camera technology by our local law enforcement agencies comply with the Data Practices Act. Members, this bill is just about 2 years in the making. It is supported by the law enforcement organizations, the MPPOA, the Chiefs Association, the Sheriff's Association. There were a number of other organizations, a lot of other organizations that were involved in the negotiations and the public testimony and the adoption of these provisions over the course of the last year and a half. Appreciate all of their work. I believe that we have a well-balanced bill which provides for good law enforcement use of this technology to aid in criminal investigations, criminal prosecution, and will also provide for accountability for our law enforcement officers and for those who are being recorded as well, so that there is a more reliable documentation of what happens in any incident involving significant use of force between our citizens and our law enforcement officers. I am happy to answer any questions, and I ask for your support.
Discussion of the motion. Senator Hall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise in support of this bill and want to thank Senator Latz and the Judicial Committee for doing a great job. Well, we certainly had a lot of help, a lot of testimony. I want to thank my Chief Police, Eric Gieske from Burnsville, and the others that came down. I think this ended up really well. We needed a body camera bill, and we got one, and I'm very appreciative. So thank you, Senator Latz.
Further discussion of the motion? Senator Champion.
Thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to speak about this particular bill. First of all, let me say I am appreciative of the fact that Senator Latz and the other committee members did go back into the conference committee and remove a provision that the community saw as pretty challenging. That provision allowed law enforcement to view a recording prior to writing a report. I believe the whole reason for the body camera bill is multifaceted. It is meant, in my mind, to make sure that there is transparency, accountability, and to enhance relationships between community and law enforcement. And in order to do that, I think you want to make sure that there's always balance and that there's always an opportunity for individuals to do their work, and for the other folks on the other side of the equation to be supported and protected as what we believe that our law enforcement folks should do. The provision that was taken out today that I think was important, and again, I applaud them for taking it out, was something that was also posed by not just the community, but also the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. There was testimony in the conference committee where a representative came forward and said that they are in the process of working with various law enforcement agencies around their policies around body cameras, and that any provision that would, on a state level, allow access to those recordings prior to a person writing their report will undermine their efforts of trying to come up with best practices. Yes, we believe that it's important for local municipalities and local law enforcement agencies to look at their neighborhoods, to look at their departments and make decisions about their policies when it comes to this important mechanism. So not only the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension talked about it, but also ACLU and others. So from my perspective, I'm glad that provision is no longer there. I believe law enforcement will still be able to do its job. This is a tough issue. We know that a number of different entities have talked about this work, and all is not done. There are many things in the bill that I'm still yet uncomfortable with, but guess what? There's no perfect bill. But guess what? We should make every opportunity to strive for perfection in order to make sure that we are doing the public good. And so from my perspective, I thank the committee for revisiting this issue. I will not be supporting the bill today because I have a couple concerns still with the bill. One is when we start defining or looking at a person having the discretion or the police having the discretion to not tape something or redact something that seems to be offensive to one's common sensibilities. And I know my good friend Senator Limber, Madam President, often says when I'm sitting next to him in judiciary how we need to make sure that there are certain words that are, if they're not in statute, what does it really mean in order to make sure that we are giving people the proper directive that they need in order to do their job. And we want law enforcement to do their job. We're not here to be an obstructionist. So I believe that's important. And last but certainly not least, when it comes to recordings in public, there's some criteria that has to be looked at, and for substantial bodily harm to be one of those provisions, I think that's a little high bar because there are other instances where I believe that if certain behavior is exhibited both by police or on the other side of the equation.
Excuse me, Senator Champion, there's too much noise in the chamber. Please be quiet. Senator Champion.
Thank you. And if there's any concern on either side of the equation that may not result in substantial bodily harm or may not result in a couple things, that I still think that perhaps the public should still have a right to see those things. But those are just some of my concerns. But again, I'm glad that the major provision that caused much more angst than what's currently still in the bill, I'm glad is no longer there. And I thank you all for listening, and I will not be supporting the bill today because I still believe that there's much more work to be done.
Further discussion on the motion. Senator Newman.
Madam President, will Senator Lance yield to a question?
I can't see him. Yes, he does. Senator Newman.
Madam President, Senator Latz, if you would confirm for me the understanding regarding the issue that was removed today regarding the allowance of the law enforcement officer to review data. Is it, or am I correct in understanding that the decision as to whether or not to allow the law enforcement officer to review the data will be left up to the local law enforcement agency and be included in their written procedures?
Madam President.
Senator Latz.
And Senator Newman, the general question of whether or not law enforcement will be able to view the data is more broad than the particular provision that was removed from the bill. The law enforcement generally are defined as subjects of the data, so they will have access as subjects of the data to the recordings, generally, and also in their capacity in the event of a criminal investigation that's going on or preparation for legal proceedings. The provision that was more controversial was the question of whether or not the law enforcement officers would be allowed to review the recordings before they write their official written report for the incident that occurred, or are requested before they give a formal statement to an investigator in connection with that incident. And what this does, the statute would have required that the law enforcement officers be given that opportunity. By not including that language in this bill, the statute will be silent as to that matter, and the law will remain as it is today, which is that a local law enforcement agency, or in the event that it has a governing body like a city council, will have the ability to make their own decisions as to how they handle that question, and they can choose or not to choose to put that in a written policy as well. That is not required in this statute.
Madam President, thank you, Senator Latz.
Further discussion of the motion. Senator Clausen.
Thank you, Madam President. Would Senator Latz yield?
He does. Senator Clausen.
Thank you, Madam President. Senator, in your explanation of the bill, you talked about the Tennyson warning had been removed. And I'm just wondering, is there a legal position on that? I can see where it would not be practical in some situations, but is there a legal position as to why that provision was removed?
Senator Latz.
Madam President, Senator Clausen, this is more comfort language. Under these circumstances, typically there would not be a Tennyson warning required anyway, but there was a desire to make sure that that was clear under these circumstances as well. So there's additional language that was put in here just for clarification purposes.
Further discussion of the motion. Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Madam President and members. I was a little late getting into the game of body cameras. Those of you, most of you know that I was not in favor of just in general putting body cameras on officers. However, body cameras have been around for a long time. No, excuse me, not body cameras, but cameras in law enforcement have been around for a long time. Most of the time you would see them on dashboards. You'd see them being utilized in some special cases like undercover work, things like that. That were covered under the legal aspects of any investigation. But I do realize now that body cameras are being looked at very strongly by some departments. In fact, we have some that have in the state of Minnesota. So something needed to be done when it comes to the gathering of data and how long it's stored and what can actually be used. And I guess I would be remiss in my job as a lawmaker not to realize that this is something that's coming and not necessarily real quickly. However, I don't think that a lot of CEOs of law enforcement statewide are convinced that body cameras are still practical for them. I also still share that same concern. Members, I remember some years ago when being a young deputy as well as a sheriff in the later years, everybody talking about community policing. And community policing has been around since the beginning of time. And when you see and remember the officer walking the beat, you don't see that a whole lot anymore. I wish, quite frankly, you could see that a lot more, the officer out talking to the public. I think it would create much better relations when it comes to just knowing the people, knowing what's going on in the street. But unfortunately, I think our officers, especially in the metro and suburb areas and counties as well, are getting so busy that they find themselves not able to get out and do that good, strong public relations that's needed to make a good community police department or sheriff's department in our area. So I was reluctant at all to even go along with the idea of having anything to do with it because I think it was something reactionary to a few bad apples, quite frankly. A few bad incidents that happened not only in other states, but maybe some here as well in the state of Minnesota. People should also realize that these types of actions that are taken by those that are out there to protect us every night are actions that can be sliced, diced, and pulled apart and not only criticized probably in the media, but also for sure in a court system, or even if it doesn't go to court, there's always somebody around that has the ability to question whether that split-second decision was made correctly. And is our body cameras gonna make all that correct and all that right? Folks, I don't think it will. You've got mental situations that you're going to get into where the officers are going to get into high-risk things where they didn't have the camera on, and now they're going to be required to put it on, and hopefully for their sake, as well as the sake of the person that they're dealing with, that it does go on. If it doesn't go on, then what's going to be the next problem? What's going to be the next question? If it becomes inoperable in one way or the other. I don't know just how good these cameras are myself personally, but I think at least this is a start. I know Senator Latz and the committee has been working on this tirelessly for the last 2 years to try and come up with something, and a lot of agencies, according to the backing of the bill, were certainly behind getting something going before they had decided to buy the things and put them into operation. So I thank Senator Latz and the committee for the long debate, thoughtful debate that I know went on with regards to this. I think it's a good start. But I still don't think this is going to be the fix-all. I don't think you're going to see a lot of agencies, quite frankly, get these body cameras because, quite frankly, people that used to approach law enforcement on the street, as I referred to this, starting this conversation, about walking up and talking to an officer, put yourself in that officer's position, put yourself in that position of the person who's going to come up and potentially report a crime or maybe even indicate that there's some activity someplace, with even the thought that they're going to be recorded, is going to stifle that kind of information that is so important for public safety. That's where I'm really concerned. If they see a camera on somebody, are they really going to approach that officer? And I know there's been some that say that if it's a policy that they have it on all the time, they can turn it off. Are they still going to trust that the officer is going to turn that off? That's my big concern. So again, it's a good start, folks. I think the agencies are looking for something at least to get off the ground, and still they have the decision to either go with this or not go with it. But I don't think this is going to fix and solve all the problems that I think was brought up about body cameras. I just hope it doesn't. I hope it doesn't hurt public safety. And I guess that will remain to be seen. But thank you, Senator Latz, for the thoughtful discussion, and I do support the bill in its form.
Further discussion? Senator Kent.
Thank you, Madam President. I also rise in support of this bill. This is an issue that we have been working with and looking at for some time, both in the Legislative Commission on Data Practices and in a number of committees. I want to echo what has been said by others. This is new technology, this is uncharted territory, and we still have a lot to learn, and we're going to be coming back and revisiting these issues. But one of the things that we've heard through surveys of law enforcement agencies and testimony in different committees is that a number of these agencies are reluctant to implement body cameras until the legislature takes action. And for those who believe that body cameras are an important evolution, this is an important step so that we can get this technology introduced and take it and have the opportunity to use the benefits that it's going to provide, the transparency and just the greater information that we will have. So again, I just want to remind everybody that this is an important step in this process, and I encourage everybody's support. Thank you.
Further discussion of the motion? Seeing none, Senator Latz.
Madam President, just a couple of reflections in response to some of the comments, both on the floor here and that I've heard around a bit. One thing I want to emphasize, because there's been some suggestions that some communities were did not have the opportunity or did not participate in the process of developing this legislation, particularly communities of color. And I want to make sure that the record is clear that communities of color have been attending and participating in meetings relating to the formulation of this bill for at least a year and a half. When we had 3 long Judiciary Committee hearings last spring of 2015, there was attendance and participation at that time. When we had joint House-Senate hearings last December, we specifically had testimony from 4 or 5 representatives of communities of color. And I know that when some of the House leadership on this issue were having interim meetings to discuss this, there was participation by at least several representatives of organizations as well. And then as most recently as yesterday morning when we had the full conference committee hearing on this, there were several members of the communities of color that were in attendance in the room, some of whom made comments, others of whom chose not to. But this has been a very open process, and we've welcomed the participation of everyone who's had input in this, and I appreciate their work. Those organizations that have had an influence on the bill that's before you include the ACLU, the Minnesota Coalition on Government Information, Neighborhoods Organizing for Change, the NAACP, and a variety of others. I want to address in particular the concern that Senator Champion raised with regard to the discretion to redact or withhold access to portions of the data that may be clearly offensive to common sensibilities. And as I noted in my opening remarks, at the suggestion of Neighborhoods Organizing for Change, we added language that gave an opportunity for judicial review of that determination, so that if anyone or organization believed that the common sensibility standard was being used to improperly withhold the release of data to the public, they could seek judicial review to override that decision and to cause the data to, in fact, be released to the public. So that issue was fixed. It would have been better if we were in a position to simply say all recordings will always be public. But the fact is there are substantial costs involved to doing that. The cost of data storage, of vast amounts of recorded data. If you think about an officer on an 8 or 10-hour shift recording all the time, not only do you have equipment issues relating to batteries, power, but the data has to be stored and retained. So that's very expensive. And then whenever a data request is made for public release, someone has to go through and redact all of those persons that are captured in the data that have not given consent to their images being made public when they are otherwise protected as not public data. That is an enormously expensive process. So it was important for us to set some limitations on what data would become public. And we focused on the data that captured incidents that we thought would be of the greatest public concern, whether it be relating to the accountability of law enforcement or the protection of the individuals that are involved in a law enforcement incident. So that's why it's a more tailored focus on those kinds of incidents. There are, I know of specifically, at least 27 police departments or law enforcement agencies that are waiting for Minnesota legislature to adapt these rules so they know what the guiding rules are going forward for data classification, retention, and so on. There are many more that we may not know about, including I do know that I've received specifically contact from the authorities in the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul that they are anxious for this law to be passed so they have the guidance they need when they're adopting their plans for rolling out these body cameras in the next year. So for the protections of the persons who are interacting with the police and for the protection of the people, of the police officers themselves, this is an important bill to pass, and I ask for your support.
Further discussion, Senator Champion.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to clarify something that was said by Senator Latz. I think the important thing to remember here is that there's a difference between individuals coming in and testifying during the interim period. During interim, we know people can come in and share their ideas, that we don't necessarily consider that on the record. The second thing that I think is important is that communities that I've talked to, from Neighborhoods Organizing for Change, the Minneapolis and St. Paul NAACP, the Urban League, the ACLU, and other community groups have relayed to me that there's also a difference between someone testifying at a table, doing a hearing, and being at the table when an agreement is being crafted and reached. They don't feel like they were part of the inner circle, which is sometimes what happens. If there's a bill that's done and that's crafted together, and then it comes before a committee, sometimes people say, we have an agreement. And those are the key words that we sometimes listen to see if all the stakeholders were involved. And the stakeholders from the community did not come to the table and say, we were part of that agreement or we have an agreement. Now, members, I understand that we can't always get total agreement from everyone, But guess what? It's so important for us to make sure that we reflect and respect and get input from a cross sections of communities across Minnesota. I would equally be concerned if we only had community people who would come in and draft a body camera bill and say, we have an agreement. So from my vantage point, and members, I hope you understand, and even though we might disagree at times, but we should agree about the fact that we want to make sure that all individuals are at the table. And I just respectfully disagree with the author as it pertains to, or when he says that all the communities were at the table. Notwithstanding that, I think that we should not support this bill today, and that we would still require time for all the communities to come to the table and at least be heard and a part of the decision-making process. And I hope that's my last time speaking, but if there's something else to be said, then I'll stand up then. But thank you so very much.
Further discussion of the motion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion to adopt the Conference Committee report on Senate File 2527, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. No. The motion prevails. The Secretary will give division. All those in favor, please stand. The motion is to adopt the Conference Committee report. Of 498, I'm sorry, I got the number wrong. 498.
We got the language that I thought was objectionable. It's the division. What was the other thing?
One is police decide what's decent and indecent.
I'm a yes.
I don't care which.
If you're in favor of the motion, please remain standing. There are 41 in favor of the motion. The motion prevails. The Secretary will give Senate File 498 its third reading.
Senate File Number 498, a bill for an act relating to data practices, classifying portable recording system data.
The Secretary will take the roll on Senate File 498.
See, no, Dibbles. I know. That has me wondering if I'm in the
Members are reminded to vote. Please check the board.
could not. How do you do that?
Hey, good luck.
Have all members voted who desire to vote? The Secretary will close the roll. There being 41 ayes and 17 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. Remaining